Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first session of Save Your Nation, America and the World, 1776 to 1898. I am honored to be with you. Let me just set this up real quickly, and we will get going. Okay. We are now using, assuming my sound is good. If I sound muddy at all, please let me know. It should be good though. We are using StreamYard now, and we're using the full webinar capabilities of StreamYard, so we are in a much better situation with the format here. I'm very pleased with it. It looks much better, and it's much easier to manage and include all of you in this. So thank you, Boris. So Save Your Nation. This is a history of American foreign relations in the first century of the Republic. However, it is very important to understand at the outset that this is not a blow-by-blow history of all of the foreign policies, all the wars, all the foreign interventions conducted by the United States during that period. If you want a blow-by-blow account of the actual foreign policies, there of course will be some in this. You need to go elsewhere. This is, though, what I believe to be a much more important examination, which is of the ideology that directed the foreign policies of the early United States. What was the thinking of American leaders who conducted foreign policy? The presidents, the senators, the congresspeople, the various intellectuals around the government. What were they thinking, and why then did they do what they did? And this course is somewhat unusual in that it is a presentation of an argument, a particular specific argument about the governing ideology of American political leaders since the beginning of this nation, in particular in regards to the relationship between America and the world. What should the new United States of America do with the rest of the world? What is the relationship between us, America, and other nations and other peoples? And the argument I'm going to be making in this course is that from before the founding of the United States of America, every major American political leader, everyone, every president, every senator, well, almost every senator, certainly most congresspeople, but certainly every president, every leader of foreign policy has held a set of beliefs and ideology that has commanded that America lead the world, that America become that eagle depicted here in 1898 as America was heading overseas with its empire, that America should oversee the entire globe and all of the people on it, that it had and continues to have and this is the word, divine mission given to us Americans by God himself to go out, conquer, and uplift all the peoples and nations of the world. That is the thesis of this course. That is the argument I'm going to be presenting. It is a highly unusual argument because I'm sure most people here are aware that the traditional view of this issue is that the founding fathers in particular George Washington, but the founding fathers in general, were actually isolationists who did not want to seek entangling alliances, who did not seek to colonize other parts of the world, who did not want to exercise dominion over any space other than the North American landmass. That is, as I hope you will see, I think you will see shortly, an absolute myth that bears no relation to the stated ideas of the founding fathers and of subsequent generations of American political leaders. Tonight, we will be examining the minds, the worldviews, the ideologies of American leaders as it relates to foreign relations from the American Revolution, actually from before the American Revolution, through the Civil War. And you will see in this course an entirely different and new narrative about how American politicians have thought about America's relationship with the world. Now, we begin this story. I believe the proper place to begin this story is not in American history. It's not in modern history. It's with the Bible. I believe you will see that what American political leaders did was craft or create a brand new ideology for a new nation state that melded original ideas from the New Testament, in particular, Matthew, as we will discuss in a moment here, with ideas of new Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke that produced what we sometimes call the American exceptionalist ideology or argument, that America not only is able to carry out the call of Jesus Christ here, but should do it. So in Genesis 1:28, God says, "And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth." So this is, of course, a universalistic claim or injunction that has been interpreted by most, not all, but most Christians since, as commanding us, all human beings, to understand and act on the fact put forward here that we have dominion over where? Over our town, our family, our own nation? No, over all of the earth and all of its inhabitants. So this is where the Bible, of course, this is Genesis, this is the first book of the Bible, puts forward what came to be known as Christian universalism. God does not distinguish, does not differentiate in value among human beings. We are all God's children. He created all of us equally. And we all have equal right and responsibility, most importantly, responsibility for all other people. Well, I mean, so Michael says in the chat, this passage is about human beings having dominion over animals. You know, of course, with everything with the Bible, it's all up to interpretation, and this has been interpreted various ways. But for me and for many people, that the final clause there, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth, includes human beings. But this is not even essential. The more important passage is in the New Testament. Below that, from Matthew 28:16 to 20. And And this is called by biblical scholars the Great Commission story in the Bible. The Great Commission made by Jesus to his disciples. So here's the relevant passage. And this is cited by most people, I think this is non-controversial, as sort of the origin of what we call evangelism or evangelicalism. Jesus says, the Bible says, then the 11 disciples went away into Galilee, into a mountain where Jesus had appointed them. And when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and spoke unto them, saying, all power is given unto me in heaven and in earth. Go ye, therefore, and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. Now, many, possibly most Christians have interpreted that passage as commanding all of us who are Christian to go out and convert all people to Christianity, to the teachings of Christ. And it is not just our right to do that, it is our obligation. It is an injunction from Jesus to do just that, to treat all the world's people as our own brethren. And because they are all our own brethren, we have a unique responsibility for them. And this has been generally cited and interpreted as the origin of evangelicalism among Christians. Not all Christians have been evangelical, but of course we know that there has been a powerful evangelical tradition within Christianity, and in particular, I am arguing tonight, in the United States. This commandment from Jesus, this commission from Jesus, I am arguing, as I think you will see, was taken seriously by the founding fathers and the early leaders of the United States of America in regards to foreign relations. The foreign relations of the United States, I'm arguing, has been from the beginning informed primarily by this biblical notion. So let's take a look. Before we get to America, though, as I mentioned earlier, the argument I'm making is that the founders of this country merged that evangelical Christianity with the ideas of classical liberals of the Enlightenment tradition, in particular John Locke. John Locke, as is widely agreed upon, was the principal, primary influence on the founding fathers. And here is what he says in the Second Treatise of Government, which is his most important book, read by all the founders and cited constantly by all the founders. And you will see that John Locke is steeped in Christianity as well. But he introduces a new twist on it, which now is called classical liberalism. So this becomes the template or the guide, I argue, for foreign policy makers going forward. He says, when God gave the world in common to all mankind, he commanded man to work. And man needed to work in order to survive. So God and his reason commanded man to subdue the earth. This is his reference to the Genesis passage that I just read, i.e., to improve it for the benefit of life. And in doing that, he expended something that was his own, namely his labor. A man who, in obedience to this command of God, subdued, tilled, and sowed any part of the earth's surface, thereby joined to that land something that was his property, something that no one else had any title to or could rightfully take from him. So this passage is usually cited as the origin of the idea of property rights, private property rights, which it is. It is very much that. And that, of course, has been sort of central in Western governments, in particular U.S. governments, and in particular in American thinking ever since this was written. But how might this be relevant to foreign relations, to relations with people and nations outside of America? It's not clear, is it? And when I first read this way back as an undergraduate in college, I had no idea that the implications of this very statement and the rest of Locke's thinking meant eventually the death and destruction of many, many people and the conquest of vast swaths of land, especially in North America, but elsewhere as well, ever since the founding of the United States of America. So let's take a look at how this happens. There is a very little known French, or was a very little known French kind of jurist, legal scholar, philosopher named Émile de Vattel. Actually, he was Swiss. I'm sorry. He's from Geneva. But I think he wrote in French. Émile de Vattel, who wrote the first systematic attempt to establish international law. And this was the book, The Law of Nations, which he published in 1758. This is, again, the consensus that this was the first sort of international legal treaties, or the first attempt to establish a framework for international law. And it was a huge hit among the founding fathers in Philadelphia. When they met the Continental Congresses, they passed it around, and most or maybe all of them read it. Certainly the ones who would be responsible for foreign policy, I believe, all read it. And here's the evidence for that. Benjamin Franklin said this in 1775 during Continental Congress. He said, "It came to us, this book came to us in good season when the circumstances of a rising state make it necessary frequently to consult the law of nations. Accordingly, it has been continually in the hands of the members of our Congress." Okay, all I'm doing here is establishing that this book was highly influential among the founding fathers. Now, why does this matter? It matters a whole lot, especially if you were an Indian. Because what Émile de Vattel did was merge the ideas of Christ with the ideas of John Locke to produce a new philosophy of foreign affairs that spelled the demise, the doom of native inhabitants of land all across the earth, not just in North America, but in particular and first in North America. So what did de Vattel say to produce this ideology? And this right here, this passage in his book, The Law of Nations, I believe is the origin. This is the coming together of the ideology that I believe animated and guided American foreign policy from this moment until possibly Donald Trump took the presidency. Vattel says here, the universal society of the human race, right there, he's already Christian, right? He believes that there is a universal society of the human race, being an institution of nature herself, that is to say, a necessary consequence of the nature of man. All men, in whatever stations they are placed, are bound, meaning obligated, to cultivate it and to discharge its duties. They cannot liberate themselves from the obligation by any convention, by any private association. You are obligated, no matter what you do, to do this. When, therefore, they unite in civil society for the purpose of forming a separate state or nation, they may indeed enter into political engagements towards those with whom they associate themselves, but they remain still bound to the performance of their duties towards the rest of mankind. This is a universalist doctrine. All the difference consists in this, that having agreed to act in common and having resigned their rights and submitted their will to the body of the society, in everything that concerns their common welfare, it thenceforward belongs to that body, that state, and its rulers to fulfill the duties of humanity towards strangers. I'm hoping that people are already seeing that this is the origin of Samantha Power. This is the origin of USAID. This is the origin of humanitarian intervention. This is the origin of the Afghanistan war, the Iraq war, the Vietnam war, the Korean war. We have, as people, a duty toward the humanity of all others. We have duties of humanity towards strangers. This is, of course, I believe, and most people believe, profoundly evangelical Christian notion. We are just as obligated to people who live halfway around the world as we are to those who live next door to us. Next passage. We have already observed in establishing the obligation to cultivate the earth. Now that little 5 words there, obligation to cultivate the earth, that spells doom for the Indians. And I think you're probably already thinking why that is. I'll explain in a moment, but especially next week, we'll get into that more intensely. He continues that those nations cannot exclusively appropriate to themselves more land than they have occasion for. He's referring to the original native nations. Those nations cannot exclusively appropriate to themselves more land than they have occasion for, or more than they are able to settle and cultivate. So he's talking about, he doesn't make it explicit, but I think there's wide agreement that he meant the Indians of North America, who were claiming, right, sovereign control over this vast territory, all this land here. They said this is theirs. They owned it. It belonged to them. And yet there were just a scattering of people in these tribes over this vast expanse of land. They cultivated hardly any of it. Most of it was just, in the state of nature after Indians had been here for centuries. And what Vattel is saying here, following on Locke, is that they had no right. Not only did they have no right to control this land or any land, because they did not cultivate it, because they did not need all of this land for their numbers. It was actually the duty of everyone else to remove them from the land. Next sentence. Their unsettled habitation in those immense regions cannot be accounted a true and legal possession. And the people of Europe, too closely pent up at home, finding land of which the savages stood in no particular need, and of which they made no actual and constant use, were lawfully entitled to take possession of it and settle it with colonies. The earth, as we have already observed, belongs to mankind in general. Again, here's Christian universalism. And was designed to furnish them with subsistence. If each nation had from the beginning resolved to appropriate to itself a vast country, that the people might live only by hunting, fishing, and wild fruits, our globe would not be sufficient to maintain a 10th part of its present inhabitants. We do not therefore deviate from the views of nature in confining, here it is, let me read this again, last sentence. We do not therefore deviate from the views of nature in confining the Indians within narrower limits, meaning taking their land, meaning it is natural and godly to take the land of the Indians. It is not just natural and godly, it is God's commandment that Europeans take the land of the Indians, because the Europeans will properly cultivate the land, which is what God commanded in Genesis. So I hope you can imagine that I mean, I don't know if any Native American leaders or any Native Americans read this book in 1758, but clearly the white man from Europe was coming, and he had an ideology to justify his conquest of your land and whatever was required to do that, including, as we know, the displacement and killing of millions of native inhabitants of this landmass. So let's look again at the further development of the ideology of America that was established by the founding fathers. There are multiple streams that come together in the late 18th century that create what I consider to be the guiding ideology of American foreign relations. So we've talked about Christianity, we've talked about Locke and how cultural and how classical liberalism then merges with Christianity through Vattel to create this new form of imperialist thinking that we are obligated by God to go out and remove the Indians who don't cultivate the land and do it for them. But then there is also Calvinism, Puritanism, and the work ethic that gets folded into this ideology as well. And you can see this very clearly with Benjamin Franklin. Now, he's writing this in 1751. He's a very young man. I think he's in his 20s at this point. So again, all of this stuff well predates the actual revolution. I have multiple statements from the founding fathers when they were all young men believing in a global empire for America from the beginning, really, of their adult lives. So here's Franklin's very interesting logical construction to justify conquest and empire. He says, the whites who have slaves not laboring are enfeebled and therefore not so generally prolific. Slaves also pejorate, meaning degrade, the families that use them. The white children become proud, disgusted with labor, and being educated in idleness, are rendered unfit to get a living by industry. Hence, the prince that acquires new territory, if he finds it vacant, let's read that again. Hence, the prince, meaning any political leader, that acquires new territory, if he finds it vacant, or removes the natives to give his own people room, it's American Lebensraum. It's American Lebensraum, living space, the idea promulgated by the Nazis that Germans needed more space to live in and that they would cultivate the land better than the Poles would. Therefore, Germany should own Poland. It's very similar. If he finds it vacant or removes the natives to give his own people room, the legislator that makes effectual laws for promoting of trade, increasing employment, improving land by more or better tillage, providing more food by fisheries, securing property, etc., and the man that invents new trades, arts, or manufactures, or new improvements in husbandry, may be properly called fathers of their nation, as they are the cause of the generation of multitudes. Wow. So if you cultivate the land as Genesis commands it, you make a piece of land inhabited by Indians profitable, productive, etc. If you do all these things that he lists, you provide more food, more fisheries, you invent new trades, arts, and manufactures, you promote trade, you increase employment, people are working, planting crops, harvesting crops, selling crops, using the money from that to invest in buildings, construction, infrastructure, et cetera, the people who do that, they deserve to own, have sovereignty over this land. They should be, he says, properly called the fathers of the nation, even if they are from Europe. So this is the beginning of the ideological origin, foundation of the American empire. There's more, though. John Adams, again, this is when he was, I think, 22 or 23 years old. Young man. I think at this time he was teaching in a school in Braintree, Massachusetts after he graduated from Harvard. So he's not even a politician yet. So he's imagining these things well before. This is 1755. Well before the American Revolution, well before John Adams was anybody notable. And he held to these views throughout his career. Now, you might notice, first of all, this is the official portrait on the right that John Adams had made when he was president. This is what he asked for. Look at what he's doing. He's unveiling a globe, standing in front of a picture that many people have interpreted as being of Caesar. And he is clearly signaling an interest in the world outside of America here. And I and many people have interpreted this as he is signaling an interest in conquering and remaking the world outside of America. What is the evidence for that claim? Statements like this that he made in 1755. He says, "If we look into history, we shall find some nations rising from contemptible beginnings and spreading their influence till the whole globe is subjected to their sway. When they have reached the summit of grandeur, some minute and unsuspected cause commonly effects their ruin, and the empire of the world is transferred to some other place. Immortal Rome rose to a stupendous height, but the demolition of Carthage, by removing all danger, suffered it to sink into debauchery and made it at length an easy prey to barbarians. England, immediately upon this, began to increase in power and magnificence and is now the greatest nation upon the globe." So he's talking about the two greatest empires in world history to that point, the Roman Empire and the British Empire. "Soon after the Reformation, a few people came over into this new world for conscience sake." He's talking about the Pilgrims, the Puritans, who left England, of course, to come to the New World after being persecuted for their religion in England. He then says, "Perhaps this apparently trivial incident, the moving of pilgrims to America, perhaps this apparently trivial incident may transfer the great seat of empire into America. It may transfer the great seat of empire into America. It looks likely to me. For if we can remove the turbulent Gallics, the French," he's referring to the French Indian Wars. The French, of course, had occupied large sections of North America, in particular Canada, northern, and sort of what's now the northern northeast of the U.S. And the British and American colonists were fighting them to kick them out. So he says, "For if we can remove the turbulent Gallics, our people, according to the exactest computations, will in another century become more numerous than England itself. Should this be the case, since we have, I may say, all the naval stores of the nation in our hands, it will be easy to obtain the mastery of the seas, and then the united force of all Europe will not be able to subdue us. The only way to keep us from setting up for ourselves is to disunite us. Divide et impera. Divide and conquer." Very clearly, from the beginning of his political career, John Adams, like, as I'm saying, all the founding fathers, intended for the new American nation to be a global empire. So then we come to what I consider to be possibly the most important document in the history of foreign relations, which is almost never talked about in the history of foreign relations. It's usually considered to be irrelevant to foreign relations. Jefferson does not mention it explicitly in the Declaration of Independence, how America should conduct itself in world affairs, what its relation should be with other nations, with other peoples. But we need to read this again with a new lens and think about it anew.